Every night at 3:03, a four-note whistle passed my house. No footsteps, no figure. I mapped it, tailed a white sedan, and watched crews fix the street. Quiet won, but not in my head.
Every night at 3:03, something moves past my house and whistles. Not wind, not a bird, a human tune. 4 notes, slow, the last one hanging like it wants an answer. It starts faint near the corner by the Carson's place, passes our windows, fades into the cul-de-sac. Exact, repeating, uninterested in weather or schedules that belong to anyone else. The first week I treated it like background. The second week I timed it. The third week I decided to catch the person. I work maintenance at the community college. Keys, filters, fans, doors that forget how to be doors. My wife runs night shifts every few days. Those are my quiet weeks. The house belongs to me from midnight to sunrise. I like patterns. I like taking them apart. I set a recorder on the front sill because phones lie about sound. I synced the microwave clock to the second. I kept the HVAC off. At 3:03:07, the notes came thin but clean, right to left, walking tempo. No footsteps. Only the tune. I wanted feet. So I tried a camera in the window. Motion zones, night mode. It caught taxis, cats, a raccoon with opinions. No person. The whistle threaded right past the lens like it had a map I didn't have. Fine. I drew my own map. I walked the block in the day, marking sight lines. Hedges, streetlights with blind angles, the untrimmed pine that hides a silhouette from the porch, the cracked sycamore near the leaning hydrant. I measured distances with steps, 15 from the mailbox to the drive, 40 from the Carson's corner to the gutter seam. I built a route in my head where a human could pass within 10 feet of me at night and remain only a voice. I set my first stakeout. Hoodie, thermos, recorder in pocket. Porch light off. The street smelled like damp wood and whatever oil old cars give back to asphalt. At 3:03, the tune arrived. Same meter, same shape. It came not from the sidewalk, but from the dark seam between hedges and curb, as if the air itself was its instrument. I went down 2 steps. The sound kept moving with steady indifference. I followed it at a parallel inside the yard, counting the beat. At our driveway, the tune matched my pace, even though I was the only one moving. At the cul-de-sac, it thinned into the kind of silence you get when a refrigerator stops and you hear how loud it had been. I stood under the leaning streetlight and waited for a human to fall out of shadow. Nothing. Only a slow drip from the gutter and the small animal work of leaves adjusting themselves for morning. Stakeout 2. I shifted to the Carson's corner with the recorder cupped in my hand and my feet in the gutter so I could feel footsteps if any existed. The tune began behind me even though I was at the start. I turned in time to hear it pass in front. The gutter gave me no vibration. The air gave me 4 perfect notes. Past me. Down the block. Into the same ending. I don't jump to supernatural. I do method. If I cannot catch a body at night, I look for a body in the day. So I started noticing people. A man in a dark parka who walked no dog and carried no phone. He moved like he trained the sidewalk and was assessing results. He appeared 3 times that week between noon and 1, twice near the Carson sign, once at the cul-de-sac drain. Each time he paused with the stillness of someone counting. He never looked at houses, he looked at air the way I look at bearings, like it owes him numbers. A woman with a stroller who didn't push.
She stood with the canopy down while tapping the frame lightly with her knuckle as if it were a barometer. She did this twice in 2 days and then never again. A white sedan with no plates, just the dealer frame. Morning, lunch, dusk. It idled by the hydrant too long and rolled away when a mail truck turned. The car wasn't illegal. It was wrong in the way a spare key feels in your hand when you don't remember making it. I started a page in my notebook, Day Shadows. I wrote timestamps and simple descriptions. No fast conclusions. Only the spreadsheet version of suspicion. On Friday, I stood by the cul-de-sac grate at 3 p.m. and whistled the 4 notes to see if any neighbor looked up and smirked. No one did. I got one wave from a window I didn't know was a window. I waved back like a liar. At night, I tried the path again. Hoodie, recorder, no bravado. At 3:02, I moved from my porch to the sycamore, into shadow, my shoulder against bark that felt like it was remembering a storm. The tune came on schedule, but quieted, as if it sensed me pretending to be a tree. I held still. The notes slipped by. No foot, no coat, no breath. The recorder caught frequency. My body caught nerves. Paranoia is measured in inches. You can't see it in mirrors. You see it when your hand rests on a doorknob and you pause because the house seems like it has a second house inside it that opens a beat later. After a week of stakeouts, I felt watched in daylight the way you feel followed in dreams. No evident person, just the sensation of being the most interesting object in a room you can't see. This would be the right place to call a friend for sanity check. I didn't. It felt like making someone stand in your backyard at 3 a.m. just to tell you you're hearing air. I prefer my embarrassments private. I changed one variable. I left the house. At 2:58, I stood at the Carson's corner instead of my porch. If the tune started near me, maybe the person would have to pass me. The neighborhood was a diagram with my point plotted in the wrong place. I adjusted. At 3:03, the tune didn't start near the corner. It came from the midpoint of the block like a street made its own mouth. It moved toward me. I stood with my back to the real estate sign and watched the air like it owed me a shape. The 4 notes passed through the space in front of my chest and kept going. It felt like standing beside a quiet truck when its fan kicks on. I stepped into the street to chase the sound and nearly got clipped by the white sedan idling without lights at the end of the block. No screech, no honk. It rolled by at 5 miles an hour like it belonged here, and I was the interruption. The driver's silhouette existed, but did not belong to a face. The car drifted to the cul-de-sac, stopped, and remained there long enough that I counted to 30. Then it made a slow turn and left the way it came. I added a note, sedan, 3:04. Too early for paper? Too late for milk.
The next day, it was easy to see extra watchers because I looked for them. A survey tripod appeared at the corner 2 blocks over, with a city contractor measuring sight lines and jotting numbers that would one day become a curb cut. A guy in a neon vest sat in a truck with a logo for a security company I knew was fake. The number on the side ended in 0000. A bicyclist in black did 4 perfect laps around our block at lunchtime and never looked down. Maybe none of them were new. Maybe I had simply tuned my brain to pick out anything that could be disguised as benign. At work, I started hearing the whistle's notes in the VFDs on rooftop units, in the tone of walk-behind buffers, in the first seconds after a hydraulic door closer takes a breath. A coworker asked if I was okay. I said, sure. The word came out the way a ladder sounds when it settles. Safe, not steady. Stakeout 3. I tried to tail the sedan. I parked my truck on the cross street where I could see the top of our block. At 2:55, I killed the engine and cracked the window. A cat yowled at someone's reality. At 3:02, the road glowed like it was thinking about changing its mind. At 3:03, the tune came from the same line, moved from nowhere to nowhere, and the sedan appeared from the cul-de-sac again, as if it had learned the path while I learned it. I pulled out slowly and drifted 2 car lengths behind. We did 4 right turns that returned us to where we started, a driver's ed square designed to shake off tails. On the 5th turn, the sedan went straight and vanished onto the main road, leaving me at a red light with my mirror full of my own face. 2 days later, a flyer went up at the mailbox for a neighborhood watch interest night with clip art handcuffs and a font that wants to be trusted. The organizer was a name I didn't know, printed without a house number. Contact by QR code only. I scanned it and landed on a form asking for my address and whether I had cameras facing the street. I closed it without typing. I am not allergic to organization. I am allergic to strangers collecting angles. Saturday afternoon, my wife slept off a shift while I replaced a porch light fixture. I felt watched the way you feel rain 3 minutes before it happens. The street looked like itself. The air didn't. A man in a navy cap paused just long enough at the corner to tie his shoe 3 times. He never checked the knot. He stood, looked up the block, and walked away. My brain did the thing a brain does when it's overloaded with unsolved puzzles. It grabbed an unrelated handle and pulled. On a hunch, I checked the real estate listing for the Carson's place. Under contract. Days on market, 3. Closing in 10. A buyer who needed a cul-de-sac and a corner. Not exciting, except the agent's notes mentioned due diligence street improvements under review. I've seen that phrase. It means someone asked the city whether the road presents special issues. Flood? Traffic? Sound? Sound. I wrote an email to the city's transportation inbox asking about any pending work on our block. I used my work signature because it makes people answer. A clerk wrote back with a polite form sentence and a PDF. A temporary overnight traffic study was scheduled on our street for the following week, 3 nights, 1 a.m. to 4 a.m., to evaluate nocturnal pass-through. They would place 2 rubber tubes across the road and count axles. No horn honking, no webcams, just data.
I did not ask for a study. Someone had. The sedan, the cap, the watch night with the QR form. Maybe all different. Maybe one mouth speaking 3 voices. I slept badly. At 3:57, I woke to the steady, slow clap of my heart. At 3:03, the tune arrived late by 2 seconds, which was probably my clock and not the world. 2 hours later, I lay in the living room daylight as if my body had been stored there by mistake. The tubes appeared on Monday, like little speed bumps that refused to care about politics. The city truck parked at the corner with a man inside who ate a sandwich as if he had never been in a story in his life. At night, the tune had to share the street with the soft thumps of tires crossing the counters. I recorded both. The whistle did not wobble when cars crossed. The sound does not yield. On the second night, a flyer appeared on 3 poles. Glossy, color, higher quality than any neighbor uses. New safety ordinance draft, midnight to 4 a.m. noise zone, with a link. The link led to a 3-page proposal to restrict unnecessary nocturnal noise in certain residential corridors. No addresses named, a map with our block shaded in red. No council member signs a map like that without a resident pushing hard. My street doesn't push anything that isn't lawn care. Someone new was trying to edit the air. I knocked on 2 doors I trust. Both people had seen the flyer, and neither cared because it didn't say parking. A third neighbor had not seen it and would have thrown it away anyway because he hates color printing on principle. I went home and reread the draft and started to feel like a person being told the tide will be canceled for his convenience. That night, a new sound joined the 4 notes. A second whistle, 2 blocks over, not in time, not in tune, a sloppy mimic, like a kid trying out a language after 1 lesson. It walked the cross street in the wrong direction and faded where the hill begins. An imitation, not an echo, a bad cover band to the original's discipline. On the next morning, the tubes were gone. The sedan wasn't. It did 3 corners at 11 a.m., the hour of people who shop for excuses. I stood watering a plant that didn't need it and watched the car pass under an old maple the city will never remove because politics has roots too. Dark glass. The driver's posture, tall and patient. I couldn't see eyes. I felt seen anyway. Paranoia doesn't need evidence. It needs rhythm. Mine had rhythm now. 303 tuned the street, daylight filled with a baseline I could not prove. To test whether I was inventing watchers, I left the neighborhood. I took my lunch break at a park downtown and sat on a bench with pigeons who run their own meetings. A woman in a red coat crossed the square and checked the reflection of the bank windows twice. A man in a tan cap read a book without turning a page. The white sedan, or its cousin, idled at a hydrant 3 blocks away with the flashers on, then off. Maybe none of it meant anything. But when I stood, the tan cap stood, and when I stopped to tie a shoe, the red coat stopped to check the sky for weather that wasn't there. On the way home, I missed my turn on purpose and circled the long way past the wastewater plant. At the gate, a sign listed shift changes, one of them at 3 a.m. The gate itself was quiet. The intake basins beyond churned like a sleeping animal that dreams about rivers. No one looked at me. I looked at everyone. It's a tiring arrangement. That night, I didn't stake out. I lay on the couch and let the 4 notes pass like I had nothing to say to them. The sound went by clean. I stared at the ceiling until my eyes learned it. I wanted to be the person I was before I knew a street could have a song that didn't belong to any of us.
In the morning, chalk marks appeared near the Carson's corner. Small X's in 3 colors at the edge of concrete, the kind surveyors leave when they intend to return with a drill and an argument. I put my boot over one X to see if it felt like anything. Nothing. Just a mark that meant the future had put a finger down and said here. At lunch, I checked the MLS again. The Carson's closing date had moved up by 2 days. Contract addendum, seller to address nuisance whistle prior to close or provide concession. I read it 3 times. Nuisance whistle. Our block had acquired a name for what moved through it. When something gets a name, it gets a budget, a plan, a person paid to make it stop. I looked up and saw the white sedan at the far end of the street, driver's side level with my house, but pointed away, mirrors catching everything. It did not move for a full minute. Then it rolled to the corner and went left without signaling. That night at 3:03, the tune arrived late by half a beat, like a singer who doesn't want to be replaced. I lay awake until dawn and made a list of what a person would do next if they wanted to keep a song that wasn't theirs. Most of the items were bad ideas. 2 were not. The first was to find the people who wanted to silence the street and watch them instead. The second was to move the song. I started with the people. At 10 a.m., I walked to the Carson's place dressed like a neighbor who loves trash day conversation. The locksbox had a sticker for a brand the big agencies use. I scanned the QR and landed on a realtor-only site that wanted a code I didn't have. I took a photo of the sign number anyway. I called the brokerage and asked a general question about whether overnight studies ever affect closings. The receptionist was kind and firm and transferred me to a voicemail that didn't care who I was. When I turned to leave, a man in a navy cap stood at the corner with a clipboard he carried like a shield. He wasn't there a second ago, which is a sentence that belongs to people who miss things. He did not wave. He did not look at me. He wrote something and then looked at the sky as if we had agreed to meet there. I walked back home slow enough to count cracks. I took a photo of the cul-de-sac grate because it is never asked to be photographed. On my porch, I pretended to brush dirt from my shoe the way a person does when he wants a second to think without being obvious. The Catman stayed, wrote, left. That night, the tune didn't come. At 3:02, the street was a held breath. At 3:04, it was a held breath. At 3:10, a car rolled by. The sedan, lights on this time. Steady, present, no whistle, no 4 notes. Only the tire thump where the city hadn't yet removed the marks from the axle counter. At 3:22, a whistle arrived on the cross street. Wrong key, wrong tempo. An imitation again, forced. It walked away from our block like a patient being wheeled down a hall.
I sat on the step and waited through owls and garbage trucks and the light that is not sunrise but knows it. At 5:11, the original tune returned. Faint, out by the hill, as if someone had moved a mouth a few blocks and wanted to see if I would follow. I didn't. Not that night. In the morning, the flyer for the noise zone ordinance was gone from our pole. The tape marks were scraped. New chalk X's appeared nearer to my house. The cap returned at 11 with a second cap, both with clipboards, both unreadable as furniture. By afternoon, I caught myself checking over my shoulder in the grocery line, in the mirror at a red light, in the reflection of my own front door. Paranoia isn't fear, it's posture. My posture had changed. I planned part 2 of my plan anyway. If I couldn't keep the people from pushing, I could, maybe, confuse their maps. A whistle is just air wanting to be precise. Streets and frames and drums and grates help it. If I changed the instrument, I could move the song, at least for a night, maybe for good. Maybe just enough to make the people in the caps lose the trail. I made a list. Painter's tape for window seams, foam for the drain grates, a cheap aluminum wind harp I could tune to not the key. I bought everything with cash, like a person who knows too many movies. At dusk, I cut foam to the size of the cul-de-sac grate. I timed my walk so no one saw me slide it in. It didn't seal, it only changed the way the mouth breathed. I put thin strips of tape on the exterior corner of 2 window frames, ours and Mrs. Ortega's next door, because she trusts me with her cat and her porch light. I hung the bad harp from the sycamore and tuned it to something between keys, the way you tune a lie. At 3:03, the whistle arrived wrong everywhere. It bent around the tape and rattled against the harp and died against the foam. It didn't disappear. It learned new vowels in one pass and sounded like a person swallowing a laugh. The sedan showed up at 3:05 with its lights off. It stopped at the cul-de-sac, waited, rolled back, crept past my house, stopped again at the Carsons' corner. I sat on the floor behind the front window and watched the headlights paint the wall with the slow care of someone trying not to wake a dog. The car left. The street stayed awake. At dawn, the foam was gone from the grate, not tossed aside. Gone. The harp lay on the grass as if a polite hand had silenced it and then apologized. The tape strips remained, which meant someone cared about one instrument and not the others. I went inside and wrote a sentence I had been avoiding. I am not the only one hunting. At 3:22, a whistle arrived on the cross street. Wrong key, wrong tempo. An imitation again. Forced. It walked away from our block like a patient being wheeled down a hall. Morning took the foam from the cul-de-sac grate and returned the wind harp to my grass, as if a careful hand had apologized for touching it. The tiny taped tabs on the window seams stayed. Whoever came in the dark cared about one instrument and not the others. I wrote the only sentence that made sense. I am not the only one hunting. The street adjusted its posture. Chalk X's migrated, 3 new marks closer to my place, fresh enough to shine. A glossy flyer vanished from one pole and reappeared 2 poles over, with the headline trimmed clean, as if scissors had edited the thesis out and left only a QR. The white sedan returned at ordinary hours and did unordinary things. Slow passes at 11:03, 1:17, 4:41. The driver liked corners the way chess players liked diagonals, places with options. A Navy Catman appeared again with a clipboard he held like a passport. He faced the air, not the houses. He wrote. He left. I tried a counter-surveillance routine that belonged in a cheaper story. No scarf, no alley, just small rearrangements. I parked on the cross street and walked in the back way. I took the long grocery route and doubled back past my own block twice in one errand. I changed the time I brought the trash cans in, hoping repetition had been my tell. Paranoia is a posture more than a feeling. It shows up in the way hands hover before doorknobs, in the way you hold a leaf blower's throttle and listen past its noise. Mine sharpened. The neighborhood did not change. I did. I started seeing watchers the way you start seeing your model of car after you buy it. Everywhere. Honest. Not rare. Part of the landscape. A stroller with the canopy down paused exactly where the 4 notes used to be loudest, and then continued as if timing were a game. A jogger did a perfect stop-start drill at the Carson corner, the kind coaches use to teach change of direction. The fake security truck with the all-zero phone number idled long enough to be noticed and left before I could take a photo that would matter. The city's axle counters came and went. The noise zone ordinance proposal kept its map red and its authors private. At lunch, I sent a public records request for any complaints containing the phrase nuisance whistle and our block number. The auto reply acknowledged my existence. My brain attached it to a clock that already had too many. At 3:03 that night, the whistle arrived late and wrong. It bent around my tape, slipped past my neighbor's tape, hesitated at the cul-de-sac where foam had been, and cleared its throat like a singer in a key he did not choose. The sedan cruised through on lights off mode like a shark pretending to be moonlight. I sat on the floor behind the front window and decided I did not want to lose a song just because someone with better printers had decided to call it a problem. I tried a different experiment in daylight. I whistled the 4-note pattern at 5 different points on the block and watched for human tells. Blinds move, cameras wake, heads pivot. The only reaction came from a crow who lifted off the sycamore like I had broken an agreement. The people did what people do. Watered lawns, loaded SUVs, lived. At the college, I took coffee to the facilities office and asked a friend in an unexciting tone whether private acoustic consultants ever teaser flyered neighborhoods with QR codes. He said they did, and that the city sometimes hires them when political appetite is low and a solution needs to look like data. He named 2 firms that love clipboards and unmarked sedans. I searched them on my phone and found brochures with phrases like corridor quieting and nocturnal abatement pilots. One case study used a photo that wasn't my cul-de-sac, but could have been its cousin.
The records office wrote back the next day. My request was valid, response in up to 10 business days. Attached, one document already available, pre-application meeting notes for a buyer's agent on the Carson's parcel.
Developers don't write poetry, but this came close. Buyer reports recurrent 3 a.m. whistling, requests municipal pathway for mitigation prior to close. Understands city cannot guarantee. There it was, someone with money giving the sound a negative name and asking for a lever to turn. The lever arrived in orange spray paint, 2 dots at the edge of the curb, 1 hash on the asphalt, a number that only road people read. I knew what it meant. Work would come in a week that starts with a letter and a promise. Crews would open metal. A contractor would lower something into the throat of the street and ask it to please be boring. That afternoon, the cap man stood at the corner and looked at me like a person evaluates a tree that might be in the way of a sidewalk. He did not wave. He did not write. He simply let the moment count as present. I watered a plant that was not thirsty and bored a small hole in my own driveway with my stare. When he left, my shoulders unclenched a degree, the way shoulders do when a dentist says you're done and you expect one more drill. At 3:03, silence arrived like a dignitary. Through the glass, nothing. Through the tape, nothing. Through lungs that had been saving a shape, nothing. I sat with the absence and counted to 60. At 3:05, the wrong whistle, a sloppy imitation I'd heard once before, moved along the cross street like a replacement bus that skips your stop. Sleep refused after that. The street felt empty in a new way. Denied, not quiet. At dawn, I walked to the cul-de-sac grate and found a coin wedged between 2 bars. A quarter, not old, placed. It caught the light and gave it back. A signal if you let it be. A prank if you prefer cheap answers. I pried it out and kept it because objects you find on your own block sometimes have work to do later. Day shadows kept their appointments. The sedan appeared in different paint. Same make, privacy glass, dealer plate. The driver's posture was identical. The navy cap showed up with a second cap. Their clipboards faced each other like shy dogs. A flyer for Neighborhood Watch Interest Night returned to a pole and sprouted a second sheet below it. Volunteer sound loggers wanted. The QR was new. The form asked for addresses and camera angles. I considered quitting. I could let the street become what money had asked it to become: compliant, sellable, easy. I could stop listening, start sleeping, return to a life where the only schedule I kept at night belonged to our microwave. I could focus on the kindness that stays even when weirdness leaves. Mrs. Ortega's wave, the garbage truck driver who tucks the bins back like a person who likes the world neat. Instead, I chose pettier charity. One last clean recording before whatever orange paint promised came true. To get it, the instrument needed to be what it had been. I removed my tape. I left the harp in the shed. I could not protect the grate, but I could give the street its old consonants back. At 3:03, the tune returned like it had been waiting to see if I would make room. 4 notes, measured, no showmanship, the exact pitch that had taught my interior walls what to expect. It moved past my window with the indifferent courtesy I had learned to admire. The sedan appeared at 3:04 and stopped outside my house with its lights on this time, the equivalent of a throat clear in car language. It idled a big beat and rolled on. A minute later, 2 caps stood at the Carson's corner and looked at the asphalt like it owed them reluctance. The moment felt like a negotiation between a world I liked and a world that pays invoices on time.
I slept badly and woke to a doormat envelope that belonged to anonymous neighbors or polite enemies. Inside, a printout of a waveform, my waveform, one of my overlays from both recorders, the slight phase offset that only I would recognize, a sticky note with neat block letters, "We have enough. Please stop." No threats, no signatures, just a sentence that tried to sound like mercy. That night, I did not stop. I stood in the dark at 3 with my hands in my pockets and let the tune go past me like a train I refused to board. The sedan turned at the corner without slowing. The caps didn't come. The block felt like a stage after a show, the crew packing up, the floor sticky, the air still shaped like applause. I made a copy of the waveform for myself and put the original back in the envelope. I slid it under the door of the Carson's place because it belonged to the buyer, not to me. If a quiet street was the price of their closing, they could at least let the sound live on paper. At noon, a city truck set cones by the cul-de-sac. Orange paint meant what orange paint always means. Night work started tomorrow. The flyer under the watch night notice now said, "Thank you, volunteers," as if the job were complete. I didn't like being told to stop. I also didn't like what obsession was doing to my hallway. Keys hung up wrong, dishes left until morning, my brain ranking shapes of noise ahead of people who actually live here. I chose a compromise that felt like a principle. One more night to listen hard, then let the city do its work. At 3:03, the song arrived on time and in tune and passed my house with the authority of routines that refuse to justify themselves. I held my breath like a person at a window waiting for a friend who never knocks. The last note hung, then let go. The next day, the grate came up. Crews rolled in at 11:50 p.m. the way crews do when they're not there to be liked. 2 trucks, 1 trailer, 4 cones, 2 men who treat asphalt like a coworker and not a floor. They lifted the grate with the care men give to objects that can break their hands, set it on a tarp, and revealed the square mouth of our little world. No cameras, no caps. The white sedan did 1 pass on lights on mode and kept going. An unmarked panel van parked 2 houses down with its hazard lights blinking slowly, not shy. They lowered a light on a cord, let it taste the concrete, and began installing baffles, half-moon plates with fine-spun edges that change a throat into a maze. I know the parts because I have installed cousins of them on big air handlers. You don't kill a note by brute force. You break its path until it forgets what it was. I should have been angry. I felt something older. The ache you get when a habit ends and you realize how much of your day was built around waiting for it to happen. I made coffee and took a chair to the edge of the yard, like a citizen of a small country watching the road become a new law. The men worked with gentle efficiency. They weren't assassins. They were mechanics of quiet. At 2:51, they finished and re-nested the grate like they were laying a lid on a container they'd share with their grandfathers. One man looked down the block, the other checked a clipboard. Cones came up, trucks left air where engines had been. The panel van followed last on an unhurried timer. I stood at the sycamore and waited for 3:03. The note came late. It came faint. It came crooked. It found the tape I had not put back up and pretended it was there anyway. It dragged its 4th tone like a suitcase. It died before the cul-de-sac. It did not die in the way the wrong imitation dies. It died the way a habit dies. Politely, with apologies, and exactly on schedule. When absence came to live on our block, the world did not collapse. Garbage trucks still angled reverse up the hill with their songs on. Mrs. Ortega's cat still judged my front steps. Kids still left scooter tracks in chalk dust. Our kitchen still had a light that makes every object look famous at 5:30 a.m. But my body woke up at 2:58 and waited for a train that no longer stopped here. I told myself to move on. The cap men had their ordinance. The buyer would get credit or a quieter cul-de-sac. The sedan had new corners to admire. The waveform on my desk could be a souvenir, like a seashell.
the sound of a place you once lived, not proof of the ocean.
The note came late. It came faint. It came crooked. It found the tape I had not put back up and pretended it was there anyway. It dragged its fourth tone like a suitcase. It died before the cul-de-sac. It did not die in the way the wrong imitation dies. It died the way a habit dies, politely, with apologies, and exactly on schedule. When absence came to live on our block, the world did not collapse. Garbage trucks still angled reverse up the hill with their songs on. Mrs. Ortega's cat still judged my front steps. Kids still left scooter tracks in chalk dust. Our kitchen still had a light that makes every object look famous at 5:30 a.m. But my body woke at 2:58 and waited for a train that no longer stopped here. I told myself to move on. The cap man had their ordinance. The buyer would get credit or a quieter cul-de-sac. The sedan had new corners to admire. The waveform on my desk could be a souvenir, like a seashell, the sound of a place you once lived, not proof of the ocean. Then the note arrived in daytime. One thin envelope, no stamp, under my doormat. Thank you for what you recorded. Please don't interfere with the fix. We're trying to keep this sale together and a few people sleeping. A signature I didn't recognize, acoustic consultant, plus a phone number with a local prefix. No threat, no bark, a rational sentence written by someone whose job is to be rational about the irrational. I put the paper in my drawer and let the number sit like a coin I wasn't ready to spend. For 2 nights, silence held. The cross-street invitation tried once and gave up. Without the cul-de-sac mouth, it had no duet. The sedan idled farther away. The caps retired their clipboards or took them to a block that still sings. The neighborhood watch QR form kept asking for cameras. Fewer neighbors scanned. On the 3rd day, the wastewater plant sent out a notice about maintenance. No service interruption, minor odor, routine. The gate time still listed a 3 a.m. changeover. The city breathes whether we listen or not. I realized then that I had never asked an obvious question. What if the person making the imitation whistle wasn't mocking the street, but fighting the fix? What if someone else wanted the song to remain and lacked a grate and a plan, so they tried to keep it alive by walking the notes into a place without air to carry them? I walked the cross street at noon and looked for a person who would try. I found instead a handwritten sign staked into a yard 3 houses off the corner. Open house, sat, 1 to 4, quiet street, with the word quiet underlined 3 times. The arrow pointed toward our block. I wanted to do something they'd call unhelpful in council minutes. I wanted to move the sound back for 1 more night, not forever, not to spite a sale, just to prove to myself that I hadn't hallucinated a person where there had only been pipes. You can't undo baffles without tools and a reflective vest and a permit and a friend who lies effectively. You can, however, tune for a different throat. The cross street had a smaller drain with a grate the city would never touch unless it flooded. The frames on that block were older, the corners less tight, the paint chipped in ways that make good tone. If the 3 a.m. pressure pulse still traveled, maybe I could coax it to surface there. I cut new foam into rectangles and made a skirt around the small drain. Not a seal, just a shape. I wrapped painter's cape around 2 window seams on the block where nobody would see from the sidewalk. I hung my wind harp 2 houses down, but without malice this time, in a key that asked to be a friend rather than an enemy. At 3:03, the cross street sang. Not the original, close. The first note arrived from the wrong direction, found the foam, and took it as a suggestion rather than a wall. The second note remembered how to be itself. The third clung to the harp like a cat deciding whether to trust. The fourth hit the old frame of a house with peeling paint and stayed.
I didn't cheer. I didn't move. I listened to a thing I didn't own become itself in a new address. Then I took the foam off and the tape down and the harp away and left the block to keep whatever it could keep on its own. The next morning, the sedan circled once, like a dog in a kitchen trying to find the source of a smell, and left. The caps did not come back. The open house sign fell in the wind. The pre-application note in my folder looked smaller. My phone buzzed at lunch with a number I didn't know. I let it go to voicemail. Later, a calm voice thanked me for the waveform and said the crews had finished the mitigation. They hoped the neighborhood would sleep better. They asked for courtesy if further adjustments were needed. They did not mention my foam or my harp or my tape or the night I moved a song. That evening, my wife asked whether the house had been quieter lately. I said yes. The word felt like a lie you keep because it feeds a good animal. At 3:03, I woke anyway and lay there in the dark with my body counting down a schedule nothing honored anymore. I waited long past the time sanity asks you to quit. Nothing came. The absence got loud. In the morning, I found a new chalk X on our sidewalk, small, almost kind, placed exactly where the notes used to feel strongest. It had not rained. No child had been outside. No committee had met. Someone who heard what I heard made a mark and left. The coin from the grate still lived on my dresser. I turned it once and let it settle flat. It made the dull sound of metal deciding not to be a message. I killed the 3:03 alarm, then turned it back on, then off again. I let the dishwasher own the night so another sound filled the room. I fixed a cabinet hinge that had been asking for a screwdriver since spring. I answered emails. Ordinary isn't glamorous, but it pays out in quiet. The block learned its new shape fast. The cul-de-sac slept through the hour that used to belong to us. The cross street offered a thin cousin of the tune on certain winds, never precise, good for neighbors who dislike patterns. The white sedan and the clipboards found other corners to love. I still noticed watchers, just a different kind. A woman at the bus stop hummed 4 notes in the wrong key without knowing. A kid on a scooter did the same through his Keith. A mail carrier tapped a bin in a rhythm my body recognized before my brain did. The song had moved from air to people the way rumors do, by giving them something tidy to carry. Some nights I woke at 2:58 and let the absence pass without greeting it, the way you let a neighbor park in front of your house without making it a story. Other nights I sat in the living room and listened to the refrigerator and the faint electric insect that lives in every modern home. Those nights were harder. My body still expected a train.
A small envelope appeared under my doormat. A USB stick. No note. I waited until evening and opened it on an old laptop. One file. 3:03 lastclean.wave. The 4 notes in their original route recorded better than I ever had. A second. 3:03 end-of-line.wave. The night the baffles went in, late and crooked, then gone. No message. Just receipts. Maybe the consultant. Maybe a neighbor with better gear. I filed them under things this street once did. 2 weeks later, I saw the cap man one last time. Not at our corner, but on a park bench. The clipboard leaned against his leg, page turned down. His posture wasn't counting anymore. It was waiting to be something after counting. I practiced not seeing him. He did the same thing. At work, my facility's radio picked up 4 notes while I was on a roof. Not the whistle. Interference, turning an alarm test into a melody my nerves recognized. I turned the radio off and on. The notes vanished. My hands shook. I told myself the truth. the part of me that listened at 3:03 isn't broken. It's simply unemployed. Neighbors asked about the noise zone ordinance. The city watered it down after the pilot success memo. Reasonable hours, community standards, enforcement subject to resources. The buyer closed. The Carsons mailed a holiday photo of 2 dogs in scarves. Our block is now a place sellers call Quiet Street, without lying. Every so often, the cul-de-sac gives a ghost of itself after heavy rain at a weird barometer when the wastewater gate forgets discipline. A half note steals a breath from the throat of the street and asks if anyone remembers how to finish. I do. I hum the rest under my breath and stop before the last tone on purpose, like you spare a friend their exit line. 2 objects live by our door. The quarter I pried from the grate, and a waveform printout that someone slid under my mat months ago. The coin reminds me another hand touched the same metal and left a message I never decoded. The waveform reminds me rooms can hold songs you didn't put there and still feel like yours. I used to sort kindness from strategy. Now I assume most adult acts contain both. The ending isn't clean. Paranoia didn't leave with the sound. It got quieter and picked a different chair. Some days it sits across from me while I fix a hinge. Other days it stays in the yard and counts birds with embarrassing sincerity. I am not being followed, not in the crossword sense. I am being remembered by a schedule my body respected too long. On the last warm night of the season, I carried a chair to the sidewalk at 2:58 and put my feet in the gutter like tide practice. No cars, no caps, no flyers. At 3:03, nothing. A minute later, 4 thin notes floated from the hill, unhurried, not for me. Somewhere else had picked up the habit. Its own baffles, its own watchers, its own person waking up at 2:58, convinced he can be a better instrument than he is. I went inside and turned off the microwave's bright clock. The kitchen looked better without a number bossing it around. I set the coin back in the dish, the waveform under the pen, and lay on the couch without expecting a train. The house held still. The refrigerator clicked off. Quiet arrived as itself, not as proof of loss. I slept for the first time in weeks. Morning left a chalk X on my step, small, almost kind, easy to miss. Not a mark for cruise, a mark from a person who hears the same things I do and still thinks it's worth telling the pavement here. I left it there. Then I stepped over it and made coffee, which is another way of choosing the life that continues when the map changes. That's the ending I have. Open, a little negative, honest. The street forgot its song. I still remember it. I don't know which of us is luckier.